Welcome everyone to Coach Unboxed. This is a project by Unboxed Sports, an agency elevating professional tour tennis coaches on and off the court. I'm Yannick Yoshizawa, and today I'm joined by Rob Steckley, former Canada #1 player, Davis Cup player, and University of South Carolina Gamecock. As a coach, Rob has worked with 2 top 10s in doubles, including Lucy, I'm going to say the American version, Safarova, as #1, and 4 top 30s in singles. His partnerships resulted in Grand Slam titles and more than 20 titles. Passionate about creating content, his unique approach has been captured by major networks like the New York Times, ESPN, Yahoo Sports, among many others. Welcome, Rob. Thanks for joining us. I just love your background. I feel that like you just put a fake background, but that's how cozy and nice your house is, I'm assuming.
That's how we living, baby.
Are you warm? How's
I
the
am.
Canada winter?
Yeah, it's cool. It's been actually the best Canadian winter because we've had a steady winter. We can call it at least a winter. Typically, the last several years has been super inconsistent. You brace yourself for winter, and then it's just foggy, that zero temperature, misty. Disgusting. So this year is actually, it'll come down, it'll snow, it's cold, then it's super predictable, and Canadians like predictable. So
Predictability. That's good.
yeah.
Well, after I spend 5 minutes introducing you, before
I
we
think that
get
wraps us up.
no, but now we need you. Now
It's
it's
downhill from
even
here.
longer. Oh my gosh. But I think there's even better stories as people will do here. And let's just start from the very beginning. The baby Rob, if you can tell us a little bit about how it was your childhood, where you grew up and how you got into this sport that you still are part of it.
I was an active kid. I came out just like this. My parents said I was just out of the womb like this. So I had a ton of energy. I was a sporty kid, didn't really gravitate to being in a classroom, which has pretty much been my theme the entire life. I've just been an outdoors type person, charismatic. But yeah, when I was a kid, I just loved sports. I love to just be active, spending time with other people. Um,
What
and
sports did you play growing up?
I did everything from your snowboarding, skiing, skating, hockey, soccer, and then of course tennis. I picked up a tennis racket maybe about 7 or 8, and then I was swimming and windsurfing. A lot of board sports. Like I was more of the extreme type of
Yeah.
sporting guy. I always wanted to be a professional skateboarder, professional windsurfer, and then I was a drummer, and I still am all those things. But tennis came around 7 or 8, and then it was the classic hitting against the wall, that story. And then I became obsessed with just spending time with the racket and the wall and what that felt like. And then my parents introduced me to just a group setting in the summer, which I absolutely despise. Like the vibe of tennis and just the sport itself, it didn't really resonate with me at the beginning. And then my parents just said, "Kid, you got no choice." And so they signed me up in the winter time. And I remember the very first class, I purposely left out my tennis shoes. I brought my boots. It was snowing. I thought for sure the coaches wouldn't let me play. And they said, "No chance. This kid's getting on the court." And then from there, surprisingly, I just enjoyed the process of being inside. A coach took a liking to me, and it was a little bit more fun. And for some reason, it was right time, right place type thing. And sure enough, the coach that actually paid attention to me was Daniel Nestor's brother.
Wow.
And he was doing these camps, and he was like, "Oh, this kid's pretty good." And then, yeah, he kind of upgraded me through the winter season. And that's kind of what I fell in love with, like the upgrading and getting better at the sport pretty quickly. And then I found a place in the tennis world.
Wow. So it was a hate and love relationship that it became to start liking more and more. And I'm assuming that the results also started to drive you to like the sport even more, right? You end up becoming Canada's #1 player. Talk a little bit about that process of just the evolution that you got to that place. Was there any point that like you started to feel, oh, this can actually become my profession, I can make money out of this? Or Was it always just very, I'm gonna say recreational, but more just like, oh, I have fun on these sports and I like it? Or was there a moment you're like, I think I can do better?
From day one, I knew I was just going to be rich and famous.
And there you are.
Yeah, hey, that's it. You know, not really. At the very beginning, it was more, how do I get better? Do I even like this sport? And then once I caught the bug, like you were mentioning, it was just more the results. And then it became an obsession, I guess an identity. I quickly weeded out the other sports and what I had thought I was going to be doing. And then I did remember telling myself at grade seven, eight, along with a few other I'm going to be a professional. It was, I'm going to be a professional tennis player. But money was definitely not even on the radar. I never thought about those things. As I gotten older, obviously money is important, but that's ultimately never what drove me. It was just the obsession with going to the tournament and trying to win. And that's never left. It's just been super hungry with if I finish second, third, I just wasn't as popular anymore. Finding myself as a kid was pretty
Yeah,
much what I was doing. So I didn't realize, long term what it looked like in terms of being a professional. Yeah, I was just being a kid, just showing up and
sure,
playing
yeah.
a game pretty much.
And now people look back, even currently, Canada has had a lot of great players. So you see how the development there, while it's still a huge country, there the population it's not that big, but it's still pretty impressive, to achieve anything when you become the number one player in your country. I remember when I was coming to college in the United States, at least for Brazilian standards, that was sort of like you're giving up on your professional career.
Yeah, I
You know,
understand.
what was that something that were you thinking about, or were you like college tennis can be a great stepping stone to me? How was that process?
Well, that's a great question because that's exactly where my life took a turn for the worse for a couple of years, and then I figured myself out. But yeah, I felt I was a failure going to school. There wasn't an alternative route, so when you went to school, you just kind of felt like that's where it ended. Of course, there was a few successful stories, but now I think it's definitely matured to where it's an explored route. You go there with the intention of getting out in a couple of years. So there's a clear exit plan where back in the day when we went to school, it definitely was a failure type setup to a certain degree, especially to me, because when I went, I did have those conversations. Personally, I was ready. My game was there. However, my mindset was not. And looking back, hindsight as a coach, exploring that kid was definitely not ready. So the outside was definitely guiding me in the right direction. Of course, amongst other things, there was no money. The opportunity was you either going to make it or you're not going to make any money at all. So it was really a conversation of like, how are we going to do this? So listen, kid, best option, go to school, prove yourself, get out of there. I took that as you suck. And I internalized that the wrong way. And so I ended up taking a turn for the worse. I went in, wrong mindset, played, of course, the first semester. And I think I won the first three tournaments. So my tennis was there, but the mindset was how dare everybody turn their back on me? And then that's where I slowly started to slip into peer pressure. I started exploring parties and starting to get more familiar with I could still go out and play tennis where that was not even a question before, right? So I
Yeah,
was actually super dialed and disciplined, even though from the outside it looked like I was a hothead. I was like praying before matches, like I'd do anything to get a W,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Whereas I explored all of a sudden the second semester, and that's kind of where I was like, F life.
yeah,
I'm not even liking I'm not even a tennis player. I hate tennis,
yeah,
and then that's where my vices started to catch up. And so I had quit tennis after the first year. I failed out of school purposely, burning my textbooks, not showing up to any of the exams. I remember both my coaches were like, they got the news. They're like, this kid's not showing up for exams. And they're like, Rob,
yeah.
what are you doing? I'm like, sayonara. And I knew that was my exit plan because I would ultimately get thrown out of school and there would be no option. Little did I know that plan backfired because that's when I did get kicked out of school.
Yeah.
there was nothing waiting for me on the other side. My parents just took a look at that, as old school style parents would do, and they just said, "Bro, you're not coming back to that. What do you think this is?"
Yeah.
And that was it. That was the beginning of me self-sabotaging, going down a road of just trying to figure myself out. I was on my own, but this time I was really on my own. Like I had no place to turn to. I didn't have anybody to look after me. And that's kind of where I started to explore, options of like, okay, what am I going to do? And so I pretended I was going to play tennis because people took me in because I had a name. And so they're like, oh, this would be great if he'd come around.
Yeah.
And I just pretended. I'd lied, the whole time. I had no interest in playing anymore. I'd been on that train to self-sabotage. So I was reckless, hanging around the wrong people, getting around the wrong crowds. And then with that came, I officially tank. I do not want to play tennis anymore. And so I moved back to Toronto. I forget how many months after I'd been out of school, and I tried to live in Miami on my own. And then it took about a year and a half. I got around the wrong crowds. I started exploring, I'm going to be an actor. And then that came with a dark side of, if anybody would know what down
Mm-hmm.
that rabbit hole is, it's a dark industry. When you don't have parent supervision anymore. And I was really rebellious at that stage. I was like, this feels really good. So I went to some dark places and just couch surfing, homeless, totally disconnected with any responsibility whatsoever until I really had no options. And it's really true. You really find out people are only willing to help you so long. And then I cornered
Mm-hmm.
myself into finding out that it was much harder to be couch surfing, trying to find places to live and carefree, like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
things are going to work out. You find out that, 1 minute you're sleeping on people's couches and the next they're like, bro, you got to go. And then you run out of people and the rest of the people are in the same scenario too. So now you're
Yeah.
finding yourself sleeping in Dunkin' Donuts. And this was all put on me. I brought this upon myself. It wasn't like I came from a bad upbringing or anything. It
Mm-hmm.
was just more, this is what I needed to do. And sure enough, when I hit that point where I realized I just hit this moment of like, I woke up and I'm like, Rob, what is your life about? Like, what are you really doing? What are you trying to prove? Because nobody's here trying to save you. And you can see how it's going nowhere, but you're not this guy. Like, what are you trying to do? And that's kind of where the evolution of where I hit the restart button. And then,
Do you remember that very specific moment, or even just that moment was a little bit of, because you do ended up coming back to tennis very successfully, uh,
yeah.
and but tell us, was that one moment? How did you even start that rebuilding process? Were you just like very vulnerable, and then once you showed that, were people helping you back?
So that's another great question. I was at a place where everything started to make sense. I had to get a normal job, which is an hourly wage, at a place that used to sponsor me. So I had been in there. I felt shame and embarrassment. It was a very reputable, wonderful store that used to sponsor me as a junior with
Mm-hmm.
like racket stringing and whatnot. And they sponsored a lot of national champions. And being in there working and having people come in and recognize me over time started to chip away at me because I started to just really be ashamed and embarrassed. And so I started making this pretend story like, I'm coming back to tennis, I'm coming back to tennis. And slowly I started to realize I don't have enough hours in the day to make enough money to pay for rent and other things along those lines. So like, what is it really that I'm after? Because I had a good life before, and slowly having those honest conversations, and just taking the bus and just like
Yeah.
really, like, I'm not trying to embellish anything. Like when you hit a spot where even if you don't have money to take the bus, you're walking now. The struggle is so real. But then it's like, well, I'm not going to stop. So you just realize how can it get better? And so a conversation from me saying a fabricated lie about I'm coming back to tennis trickled into the tennis world. And sure enough, coaches started to call my cell phone. They got a hold of it from my parents, who I hadn't talked to over a year. And I remember my mom calling me out of nowhere. And I'm like, I hadn't talked to her in so long. What's going on? She's like, are you go back to school? And I said, no. And then she just hung up the phone. And then that was an idea that just kind of sparked. And then as I was walking the next several weeks, walking to work, it just started to come to me like I could possibly go back to school on scholarship. That's $50,000. How long would it take me to work? And what am I working at? Like, this is not what I see myself doing. I actually seen some dark things the last couple of years and been a part of some shockingly things that it had wanted me to get back to just clean life. I
Yeah.
love that it's just so sobering. And you wake up, you have a routine, it's clean eating, clean lifestyle, discipline, exercise, focus. And so all of those things that I had been good at, but kind of made this story up like, I'm so good. I'm so, it's like, listen, kid,
Yeah.
you're not so good. Look at you now. And so when that started to bounce back, I started recognizing I already tasted shit. Like I
Yeah.
know what the real struggle is. That stuff is nothing. Like that's just you should get up. That's a luxury to have a routine, do the same thing. And so I started bouncing the idea of like, okay, let me call one of these guys back. And a coach took a chance on me, Joe Cabri from Lander University in South Carolina. He was the very first coach I had ever spoken to. And then I'd gone down the rabbit hole of, oh, what other schools could I go to? And then academic probation
Yeah.
from the mistake
You
I had
say, yeah.
made by
Mm-hmm.
flunking out.
Uh-huh.
None of the schools could offer me a full ride until I would get eligible, but they had been telling me it's going to be really tricky. Like, I don't think you're going to be able to do it. So if you want, put up the money first,
Mm-hmm.
come and we'll see how
Yeah.
we can organize this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Cabri had taken a chance. He said, listen, boy, you come down here, everything's going to be taken care of. I'm going to take care of you as long as you come down with the right mindset. If you take a chance on me, I got your back. And that's how it happened. My life
Wow.
just changed. Yeah, somebody was willing to give themselves to me and give a chance, right? And look out for me. I felt like that was my big brother, like nobody needs to do that. And so I really felt like gratitude at that time. Like it just hit, like that's a huge step. Like
Mm.
for him to stick his neck out, take that chance like that. I was just willing to do whatever it takes at that point just to clean my life up. Anybody who was willing to give me the time of day just to say hello. I am a good person. So I've always come from that. So once I got back to that place of childlike innocence,
Mm-hmm.
it was so much easier for me to conduct my day because there was no type of standard. I was just happy to get up and place a routine.
Yeah. I mean, you come from the tennis industry, but this is such a incredible story of uplift and knowing yourself and overcoming, which I believe there's so many people that can relate it. This coach takes a chance on you. How was that leftover years during university? Were you just like full on? Was there moments that like saw the other side and you hesitated, or were you just like, hey, this is me, I'm clean all the way, and this is my goal? You had that mindset that the coach asked you.
Yeah, I was already like his. Like it's funny when you surrender. Like when you hear those stories about like people surrendering, like I just it wasn't even a question. Like I was just so excited for me to get an opportunity like that because I'm telling you, when you see the other side of like real struggle, how to survive daily, like
Yeah.
it's not just just something like, oh, you go back home, like
Yeah.
how do you survive? Like you don't have money for food, and then the problem solving within that, believe me, becomes really real. So a setup like that was not even a conversation other than like, I'm just so excited, I can't wait to get back. And then just from there, it was just stepping out on court with anybody was an opportunity for me to hit some balls again. So it wasn't where I was before. A lot of tennis players feel like, oh, I'm too good for this practice, what am I doing? And they hold themselves hostage. It didn't matter. It was all about me and my growth. And also the fact that somebody else is coming to practice, me being aware that it's ultimately like to help encourage the other person as well. So even though they were an opponent, I was actually a fan. So
Mm.
it's like you're now playing this game where it's like, man, they're playing a little bit better than me. And I love that. Or they're worse. Let me help them get better. So it was an unbelievable experience. And I never lost that motivation. There were
Yeah.
times, obviously, where I would still go out, but the focus had never left. So I knew
Yeah.
getting in, I could afford maybe a half night or doing something. But I was pretty dialed at that point, leading up until I got that opportunity to go to Davis Cup. Because within that, I told him, I said, I'm going to win you a national championship. Like that was the whole thing. Like, I got you, dude. I got you. And the whole school had been like, whoa, there's a kid. Coach is taking a chance. He came
Yeah.
from out of town. So then I played the following year. He got me eligible Yannick, it was incredible because it was weeks before I was supposed to go back home and there was no eligibility. NCAA was just like,
Yeah.
no, there's no way this kid's going to get eligible. And somehow from up top of that mountaintop, he was coming down in his coach mobile, just honking the horn with the papers outside. And
Oh
he
my
ended
God.
up celebrating. He was like, boy, we got you eligible. We did it. Throws the papers up. And I couldn't believe it. We were almost like at that point emotional, like crying. We're like, holy shit. And then the following year, through the summer and then into that period, I was just super dialed at like winning,
That's
which I did. I won the
period of national championship.
yeah, and it was just so seamless, like I had all this pressure but I didn't care because I was on a mission, didn't care, was not entitled at all. It was just like I got to do what I got to do. So I hyper focused on all of the things. Actually, fast track to what I do coach about now is just like being in the moment. That's all I did, like just in the moment. I hit one point and it was just so real, and then you just realize, holy cow, when people don't figure that out, they're just
Mm.
struggling against themselves. So in fact, it was quite easy for me to win a ton of matches because you didn't have to play your best. You just had to stay focused on one point, and it didn't bother me if somebody hit a winner, if I shanked it, as long as it went in. There was a lot of problem solving, so it was just much easier for me to win matches.
Yeah. Well, now let's get to this important moment. How was receiving that call to be part of the Davis Cup team? What did that represent to you? Talk about this moment and then post representing. Were you like, wow, I want to get to the next level now? Or what was your mindset then?
Yeah, well, I remember it wasn't about tennis anymore. My journey was a journey of like self exploration, development. So I knew I had been performing on the tennis court. I deserved the results I was getting, but it wasn't about like how can I keep progressing in my tennis? It was just how can I progress in life, get better as a person? And when I got the call, they'd said, hey, would you be interested? We have a spot available, but it would require you getting out there and playing some futures again. And so again, I just kind of sat there. I talked to the coach for a while, but it wasn't a thing. It wasn't like it hit me and I'm like, wow, I'm
Mhm.
going to do this. It was like I was super flattered, but I had never thought about going pro. This was a life journey for me. So it didn't take me long, let's be honest. I started to now think, uh-oh, there's more to the tennis thing now, I guess. And yeah, I think the time's expired at school because I have done everything I can. And without the tennis component pushing, like, okay, do I win another championship? That wasn't appealing out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so it was bigger things. So that sparked something where I was like, okay, this boy's got to get out of this little town. And that was it. And so I went off to play some futures. And lo and behold, I actually did extremely well right out the gate because of my mindset and the challenge at hand, because it wasn't again about I gotta win. I
Yeah.
don't need to win. I didn't care at that point. It was let me just do my routine, stay in my bubble, and be a good person. Ultimately, that's really what it boiled down to, because when I started playing futures, I was able to go through like 4 rounds of qualities. And these are like the beginning of the year futures in Florida where
Mm.
the cuts are extremely
Yeah.
high. And so I went through 4 rounds of qualies and then like making the semis, the both first tournaments, and beating great players along the way, which I started to recognize the fact that I had it all ass backwards. Everybody was so right about my mindset before because I had better skill back in the day. Now I was like a mixed tennis player that my strokes were worse because
Mhm.
I stopped, I got tighter, and I had no coaching anymore. So on one end, my game was odd
Yeah.
now. It wasn't so fluent and loose and like I still had my speed, but my mind was just like razor sharp. So I was able to like really take what was one of my strengths of tennis IQ and put it to use against really intelligent players who are willing to let their guard down, get a little bit frustrated, and then you could sneak a cheap point by them and just know like there's the break at 4-all. And then that kept me going. And so I was highly motivated now to explore that.
Yeah. And how was your pro career? Were you continuing to see that next step, or were you already thinking this experience is great, now I want to transition into this? How was that? What were you thinking?
I did 2 years, so I didn't lose the focus for 2 years. The first year climbing the rankings, it was just steady climb. It was the second year towards the end where I started, in the summer ish, I started playing more challengers and, making a quarters or a semis and and being really proud. I was like, wow, man, when I thought I was much better, I would have loved to make these results. Now I'm doing these results with like great players. And so I started to figure out like, okay, I belong here. That was a big sense of belong here.
Yeah.
I had always been told like you're good, whatever. That was the first sense of okay, I'm
Hmm.
here. And so I started exploring, the results started getting more steady. I did see a next chapter for the next year. We're going to segue. We could, let's say, crack top 200 or whatever that number was at the
Yeah.
time, right? And unfortunately, I got injured. I was playing a quarters of a challenger at the very end of the year, indoors Rimouski. I'll never forget, and like taking a return and might just pop. And then from there, I stayed motivated, but that's where things turned on me. I started realizing, I started asking for a little bit of help because I didn't have money. I needed to recover, get possible surgery for quicker recovery or let it mend, but I needed physio. And
Hmm.
so I started asking people for favors or help,
Yeah.
and nobody was willing. And that started to trigger me a little bit.
Yeah. Get back to that.
And that kind of set me on a trajectory where I started to think about the next chapter because I was starting to lose the motivation and I was getting frustrated at impatient because I wanted to get back out there. Then when I got back out there, I didn't feel myself as grounded as I was before because I
Mhm.
had to start the process again. So I lost that momentum. And I found out pretty quick that I started to get frustrated. I started to act out as I did many years ago. And I felt that old like personality start to
Yeah.
come back and it scared me a little bit, and then I just ultimately made a decision pretty fast, looking at like what am I going to do. I'm going to play another year, I'm going to get to 200. I have no sponsors, no money, and like all of the weight started to come back, and I just took a look at exploring the option of coaching because I actually truly enjoyed it because I've been coaching myself, but I'd been helping, like I mentioned earlier, like even the opponents, I was
Yeah.
watching what they were doing and I was like, oh man, if you just went down here, you would have had me.
Hmm.
And they're like, what? And
Yeah.
so I enjoyed that whole process and helping friends when we were out on tour and just watching their matches. Like I just genuinely embraced that. I really enjoyed helping other people. I realized right there, I said, you know what? It's not my calling. Like I don't see myself grinding for another 2 years,
Uh-huh.
right? With this risk of what
Yeah.
happens if that happens, and I don't have any security. But I really like to explore coaching because I
How,
still want to.
who was it your first? I'm sure you wanted that continue to be part of it, right? But who was that first project, let's call it, or how did it get to that point?
Well, I mean, I remove myself from obviously playing, touring, and then you have to make a decision right away. So again, that's what us coaches go through. Like ex-players, you go through this period of like, what do I do? So what coaching style do I get into? Is it club sector, private sector,
Hmm.
high performance? Tour wasn't even an option really at that point. I didn't really understand any of this. It was just so new to me. And then somebody came into my life by the name of Bob Brett, and he was with Tennis Canada, and he now took over the Toronto Center. He saw me after 3, 4 weeks of not playing, and I was just doing some private lessons, random stuff, and he's just like, "Hey, Rob, are you getting ready for Davis Cup?" And I said, "I actually just quit 3 weeks ago." And he's like, "Quit? I just saw you play."
Yeah.
And I said, it's a long story, but it's for the better. He goes, "You want to start Monday?" I said, "Sure." And that was it. He took me under his wing for a few months. He got me right away into a position, took a few juniors to Orange Bowl. And then from that process, that's where I'm leading into another great friend of mine, Coach Sylvain Bruno from Tennis Canada, had seen me in the Montreal program because I was working with the juniors back and forth. And he said, I think you'd be great in working with, which became my first project, Alex Wozniak. And she was about 50 at the time. And I remember having a conversation saying, like, Sly, I know nothing about women's tennis because I had only been in the
Yeah.
boys and the
Juniors,
men
boys.
like Milos Raonic and these guys. So yeah, Dennis actually, who I came back to afterwards, but like just the guys, I'd never taught
Yeah.
the girls. And so he just said, no, no, trust me, trust me. I think you'd be a great fit. And if all else fails, you'll just go get a tan and try it out. And I'm like, sign me up. And so I ended up going. That was my first project. No experience, but just a ton of outside experience brought me to understanding, oh, that's exactly where I want to be. With Alex Wozniak starting my career right there in the stadiums where I had been tampering in and out, and I'm like, that's it. That's exactly my calling.
Yeah. And you go into uh, great partnerships. Wozniak, as you mentioned, Lovitral, Sonia, Safashova. Now I'm taking on to the Czech here. Be proud of me. Shapovalov and Pavlyuchenko. So you've had so many great, but it's all started there, which it's an amazing story on how it started. And we even have, a quote from Wozniak who said, Rob has opened my eyes to what a true coach should be. The energy was right, and I felt incredibly comfortable. He gives me confidence. I need to be the best player I can be. I mean, it's a great phrase from anyone, but
But
to
you see,
be,
Yannick,
yeah,
sorry to cut you off, but those are the types of things that's really what's the most important to me. That's how I've always done my It's a relationship. Like I've always respected and really enjoyed the people I've been around. Like I don't treat coaching as like it is a job, it's an extension of what I'd be doing on a day to day. Like I won't hang out with the person unless I like them. And then it's just a bonus that we're doing something with goals aligned. But it's a friendship, a bond that you can't really express unless you go through that. And that's kind of where when I hear something like that, I'm like, man,
yeah.
that's great. Like it's absolutely flattered. Love.
Yeah, I mean, and I think just your story in itself and that difference that coach took on you, this quote that Wozniak says it about you, it is more than just teaching strategy, forehand and backhands. I worked for the WTA, and during the time that you were with Lucy, I think we all can agree what an amazing person.
Hmm.
Forget all about the player, but together you guys got to the top five player in the world, both in singles and doubles, which I mean, it's always incredible to see. I mean, I will spend another 10 minutes talking about all the success and highlights, but you guys won almost all Grand Slams possible, lots of WTA titles. But maybe talk a little bit about it, because this relationship, and I saw it, it was so organic. It felt more than just coaching it. It felt that you guys had such a bond. So first, how did you guys even meet? Second, how was this process of you all just elevating her game as singles and doubles player, but also just off court? It just felt so natural to see the two of you, Bethany as well, who became a big part of this circle. But talk to us about this partnership with Lucy.
I mean, it's plain and simple. I think everybody knows she liked to drink, so we met at the bar.
Really?
No.
I was gonna say.
No, 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 no. No. It was a friendship that developed via working with Wozniak. And again, I saw an opportunity for um, Alex to find a friend on tour. We had done a practice with Lucy, and I was like, who is that? She's so shy, innocent. Like, I want to be friends with her, you know? And so I had explored the option of getting them to play some doubles together. And then I was very adamant about Alex becoming friends with Lucy because I saw I saw things that would benefit Alex as a person, which would translate on the court. And I won't go into detail, but that's how that friendship lasted. They became friends, and in return, I was part of that circle. I kept in touch with Lucy, and through the years, we established a friendship. When she'd come to Toronto, she would ask me, would you be willing to help me? Not coach me. I found out pretty quickly. Helping means just spend a little bit of time. But she didn't give me the time of day. Now looking back, she had a coach who's very loyal, just wanted a little bit of help, somebody around, right? And me being the guy that I am, I'm like, oh, this would be fun, like maybe potential. But I was working with my players at the time. And so it was a good opportunity just to hang out.
Yeah.
But I was also putting my feelers out. I'm like, wow, this girl is really something special, you know? And I'd love to have an opportunity to work with her. And she wanted nothing to do with it. She just liked that we were friends and helping out. And every year she'd end up making the quarters, then the semis the following year after. that. And then from there, when she had made the semis, that's where she actually treated me totally different that week. She gave me an opportunity to be a coach. She took her guard down and she had asked me beforehand if I was willing to coach her that week. And so I felt a total shift in the dynamic. And so I said, absolutely. And you could tell she was listening. She was taking feedback totally different. She was implementing it right away. And I'm like, wow, this is something special. I really enjoy this. And she almost beat Lena, a nightmare on our end, because I think we had her 5-love in the third and then lost or something. And she did the same thing at Australian Open, but Lena turned it up. But when she had asked me, would you be willing to spend some time with me? And I think she was working actually with Billiana at the time. And again, whatever that dynamic was, but she was interested, I think, in splitting some weeks with Billiana and myself. And I had been home. I wanted to be home with my firstborn. Just she was about to be born, and I wasn't
Mhm.
ready at all. And so I think Billiana and Lucy had split, and she had asked me, "Are you capable of doing that?" Billiana and I split. And it was a number of months after we had tampered with the idea of
Yeah.
like splitting those weeks, and I just jumped on it right away. I said, "Yeah, no problem. I'm ready. Let's go." And then we started, and that's the beginning of that.
Wow, this is great. And you go in again to work with a couple more players, including Dennis, who you mentioned there. How do you have that experience? From a player, but out coaching both sides. Do you feel different when you're coaching on the tours, or at the end of the day, it's X and O's, and each are just might make any player better?
At the end of the day, player's a player. There's definitely a difference. The biggest one is you're allowed in the men's locker room. Uh, there's definitely a difference because when I had transitioned, you know how the tour is. Everybody
Yeah,
knows everybody. I had been
yeah.
friends with everybody for years, since juniors. Everybody was actually sizing me up a tad, just seeing if I could do the transition. So I did feel like that was a little bit of a challenge because all the friends, they're paying attention. And once you started to gain some results and traction, those conversations was like, all right, fine, we'll let you in the locker room. And so, yeah, there's differences between on the women's end, there's a lot more conversation. It's a lot more emotional about your approaches, how the day-to-day works and operates. And then the men, it's a lot more business form type stuff. They're able to digest things a little bit different. And of course, being ready as best as possible because there really is no option outside of that. So with Dennis, you had to make sure that every opponent was treated with a game plan that he really was able to exercise and execute. Whereas the women, you have a little more flexibility in there,
Mhm.
depending on the day and emotions from both ends, right? So
Yeah,
you go in with the same approach, but a little bit less on the WTA side in terms of structure. Like
yeah.
the discipline's got to be there, but like overcomplicating things and
Mhm.
being overly prepared is kind of something that, um, yeah, it doesn't need to be explored as much. Maybe the odd person, but I found that just keeping it pretty light, simple, that type of stuff. And as the match went on, maybe throwing in some encore coaching and whatnot and dissect like that. The men, you kind of were prepared exactly what to do. And if plan A goes, this is plan B, plan C. At 4-all when he serves here, you wait for
Yeah.
this, and he's already internalized. You hope that he's remembered this type of stuff.
Yeah. And I want to go back to this style of coaching as well. But before we finalize on that, you have an incredible skill that I think a lot of people on tour know. Your creativity is just out of this world. And also
Oh,
you
thank you.
you took into being an actual creator of content, media. I mean, there's so many skills that I don't even know how to even pronounce, but the content that you put out there, it was incredible while you were on tour, also when you were at home. And how did that come about? I didn't even ask what were you studying when you were in school, but was that just something that your creativity is like, I think this would look great if I would be able to share with other people, and you just started like filming and learn how to edit yourself and that sort of
Yeah,
thing?
I mean, I was all well. I'll break it down. Very beginning, I mean, I was very distracted. I've had so many different passions and hobbies, and I see them through. So, in fact, I was always told when I was playing tennis, get back to focus, Rob. You're daydreaming. You're daydreaming. I've always been a daydreamer. All these ideas start coming, as I grew older, I knew how to contain that. But one of the big things that stood out when I was younger was like, you're not serious. But I couldn't explain, like, I'm so serious, but I can't control what those ideas are. I don't know what that is until I was in my mid 20s and I went to university and they were like, oh, you're super creative. And I'm like, creative? What's that? Because I thought that was not serious. And then that's where I started to explore that in university. But believe it or not, it took a girl breaking up with me, being on tour at the very beginning with Alex, and establishing how do I make myself stand out? How can I kind of get inspired by what I'm doing, but show the others that I'm kicking ass? And so it just sparked something where I got a camera and I started, obviously, YouTube was really starting to kind of pick up. So you can go down rabbit holes. And I was, as I am, just hyper focused. So that became a thing where it's like obsessed with learning cameras and what that meant and bringing ideas to life, exploring what people told me was creative and knowing like my focus on court and through my day is my player. So that already got nailed. So with all the extra hours of my day, I don't need sleep. I'm obsessed. So I would just spend hours and hours and hours painting what would be the day, and doing visuals and exploring storytelling. And it was another way to connect with my player because it was a lot of fun to bring that
Yeah.
stuff to life. And when they felt stressed on certain days, and of course, it's not match day. I think at the beginning, people are like, oh, when's he finding the time? It's like there's so much time on tour if
Yeah.
you know how to pick and choose the down times and, oh, this sad time, we need a little pick me up. Or it's my time when it's like, I'm not going back to the hotel room. I'm going to explore the city, take all the visuals, take that in, and then just more experience for me. And then I can put it into a video that will recreate what that week was like
Yeah.
and whatever that content was. And so it kind of just spiraled into that and transitioned into storytelling on the road. And then with Lucy, it was developing into that tennis channel show, helping them and exploring just how do I stay busy, constantly busy, telling stories, meeting people. I'm obsessed with that. So I barely slept, let's put it that way. But
I
looking back at that, it wasn't even an option. I would sleep 2 hours a day, but when I would be up for the player, I was so fired up to be there because I was so inspired about the storytelling and then having them involved. And it just circled through the
yeah.
entire project.
Yeah. And did you have a goal in mind, meaning like what you did with Lucy, the pictures that you posted with Dennis? I mean, you can see that there is something more than just pictures there. And now also this new partnership with Marina, just the storytelling, as you mentioned. And again, you mentioned about taking a little bit sometimes the stress off. Do you have a goal to like look how much storytelling there is in tennis that can be told and said? And is there lacking that type of content within the tennis industry as well? Or was there a message behind, or was it just something very personal to you that you do?
I just enjoyed exploring what my day was like. I'm very colorful, so my mind does not stop. And it's hard to explain to somebody that doesn't really understand that, but there's just 1,000 things going on, no matter what I look at. If I hear something, see something, smell something, there's just so much going on. So I can't just sit down. So being able to create just gave another extension to calm myself down. And I find just having other outlets to be able to find inspiration and motivation keeps the tennis in perspective because at the end of the day, it's hyper focused and stressful and all of these things. But if we have outlets to be able to understand that it's just a part of life, and we chose this. That's what it meant to me. And then getting my players involved because I was fortunate that my players always enjoyed to do that. So they never came to me saying, like, I don't want to do any of this. They
Yeah.
love doing this stuff. So I found that everybody I work with loved the spotlight, loved to tell stories, to get stress off, to have that outlet. So I never had to actually convince anybody. I was just fortunate to come across people that really enjoyed to do that. And so from there, I feel like the tennis world and the day to day, whether it's tennis or any other aspect, if there's always a story in there. And as I've gotten older, obviously my storytelling and content style and whatnot has transitioned. With Marina now, it's really about the process of I want to make content that she's a part of because we're documenting the process of it so that her focus goes into coaching herself. So I'm helping her coach herself. Like at the end of the day, the feedback comes, I want you to be aware of what it is that you did. So then we package that up, what that looks like. She can review it. We're also documenting the whole process, which I find very unique, which is a different part of me because I like to do a lot of humor before, but this is a different stage where I'm using
Mm,
it a lot more as a tool for her because she's having to be aware of what she did that day. She can
yeah,
have notes to look back on. It's visual, it's fun, she's engaged. But it's also, like I tell her at the very beginning, for those contracts that are going to come her way, a big car commercial. What are you going to be like when you get that first line? Are you going to be able to deliver? And they always say, like, I got this, I got this. Put on the camera, and they're so I found with everybody I
yeah,
work with, over time, it chips away at um, that insecurity of like when the cameras and lights go on, what do I do? And they get inside their head. It just becomes second nature. It's just homework. It's just
yeah,
exercising another part, which is reality for most of us. When we're out there, we got to do podcasts and be. If you want to be present and
yeah,
in the mix, you got to get used to being able to do all of these things,
for
but
sure.
also not have it be such a taxing task that like you're not capable of bouncing back and forth,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
I'm sure it makes sense more in your head than in mine, but I think I understood after you said it. With that said, though, before we get into our last segment here, we talked a little bit about your creative approach, your out of box thinking, where there's not a lot of out box thinking, at least that you can visually see it from outside. But throughout the years of coaching, that even though you look young, you've been on tour as a coach for a little bit. Do you think the industry in itself has, I guess the right word here is, more accepting of these out of box people out
Mhm.
there? And if so, how?
Well, it's a wonderful transition because back in the day, I was the most out of box type of person alongside with the people that had made like an Agassi, like those colorful types of people. But you really had to make it in order for you to be accepted. The rest was just no. That's unacceptable. And so I've never changed. Of course, I adapt. I kind of conform a little bit, whatnot. But at the core of it, I've never changed. And so I definitely have seen when I started, I was a skateboarder slash tennis coach, which I had the reputation of, oh, he could play, and everybody through the years, everybody knows, oh, that's Steckley, right? But as I gained traction with results, because each player gained the noticeable increase in level, and so we
Hmm.
gained traction on that front. So little by little, I started to realize, okay, if I could stay humble, stay myself, but also do what I do best. At the end of the day, I like to win. I like to get this player better as a human, and it's a reflection on court. And so it wasn't until Lucy where it went from almost being, yeah, totally ostracized, like, oh, what is this guy doing? Like, he's out there, you know? And I could feel a change, a shift happen with Lucy when media changed a little bit. And then all of a sudden, she exploded with these results. And then it became, tell us your secret. Like, this is incredible that you're doing it. But before it was always like, you'd always have to prove yourself. And that's what I liked about it. I'm just going to do what I do. I actually don't care. I'm
Yeah,
just going to do what I do. And my player's doing just fine. I've always maintained that.
yeah,
But I also knew in the back of my mind, if the results aren't there, you are going to be burned at the stake for sure. But that also, I love being in that scenario, you know? Yeah, with Lucy, I noticed there was a transition where every media outlet started recognizing content and was like, wow, this is genius. What is
Mhm.
this? You know? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just things I do. you know? And
Yeah.
then it turned into something where this is the new wave. And you could see how now a shift in where media and social media presence is huge. I'd been talking about this as we're talking now since the beginning to people that looked at me as though I'm
You're
crazy, you
crazy.
know? And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, 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 no. It's going
Yeah.
in this direction. And it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's, I think people overlook the fact that everybody has a lot more than just tennis.
Yeah.
So now I think
100%.
that's where the stories are being told. A lot of people are being creative, being able to be themselves. I felt a shift for sure where, I mean, you have to get the results. Of course, there's a certain brand that certain people like, but to be more colorful is accepted now for
Yeah.
sure.
We like that. We like that. There's more acceptance out there for sure.
Well, you know
Um,
what I feel, Yannick? Just a side topic when you start to actually uncover that, there probably are so many other people that are interested in being colorful or taking a chance on themselves, but they probably just don't because they're just missing a little bit of that I
yeah.
don't care or that confidence, you know, and so they've been put in a box and they're like, but what if I don't get that opportunity? And so I've always been like, I love getting messages through the years. You've always pushed the envelope. And it's like, I haven't pushed the envelope. I just be myself. And everybody can do that. You just got to understand, like, I don't go home and say, I got everybody fooled.
Yeah.
I'm not actually serious. I don't know what I'm doing. No, I actually know. I just choose to
Yeah.
do what I do. I think that if people do understand that more and more, I think there'll be a lot more tennis players that develop confidence in themselves and then transition if they want to go into coaching or whatever walks of life that is. I really feel like the mold is starting to shift a little bit where they can
Hmm.
they can believe they can be themselves and not put in like I better play it safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Rob, you shared so much today, a journey of from struggles to finding support to overcoming successes to creative. This experience that you've achieved through your life. And this is one question that we always ask every guest that comes. What advice would you give to yourself, to your younger self, to the younger Rob? And how old would you choose that younger Rob to be receiving that advice?
I would just tell myself it's going to be okay, kid. It's really going to be okay. Just continue exploring everything that you're about because he did understand and really try to listen to the fact that people don't understand what it is that you're feeling and aware of. So don't get discouraged and stay the course, you know, and just trust. And then later on, I'd probably tell him, pick one hobby. Don't try them all. Try to get good at everything, you know.
Oh, that's good. That's good. All right. We'll just finish here with our rapid fire, which is just 10 questions, and try to answer with as many words as possible. If one, even better. And we'll start with one word to describe yourself as a person.
Motivated, energetic, and resilient.
That was more than one word.
Brilliant.
One word to describe yourself as a coach.
Motivated.
What are you most proud of in life?
Being a good person.
What are you most proud of in tennis?
Being able to inspire the ones that I come across.
What's your current dream?
To be the best husband and father I can be, because that trickles into the rest of my life.
What do you consider yourself an advocate for?
Freedom of speech.
An athlete or a coach you look up to?
Andre Agassi.
Do you have a sport or a team you keep up with?
Not anymore, but I'll always just go with the Leafs.
Do you have a favorite book or podcast that you would recommend?
One that got my life out of the gutter was The Mind Gym. I don't know who it's by, but great
Remind you.
book.
And to wrap up, is there a quote, philosophy, or mantra that you live by or that you just like? Sure.
Live every day like it's your last. The older I get, it becomes way more clear, you know? As cliche as that sounds.
Yeah. Well, Rob, what a learning 1 hour that I just had. I really
Woo!
appreciate your honesty, your vulnerability, your thoughts. These kind of stories can create such a huge impact. I believe so many people that will listen to this, and myself included. And so I appreciate you sharing it. Thanks
Yeah,
a
well,
lot.
thanks for taking the time to allow me to share and taking an interest. I felt very comfortable having a chat, so I enjoyed it. We just
Appreciate.
become best friends.
Tick, check. Well, no,
Uh,
I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for listening. Please do follow Rob Stackley on social. His content is just fire. We didn't even get to talk about Hopeless Talent here, which I actually just watched that video and I thought it was fascinating, by the way. And please follow the podcast here. More stories to come. And follow us at Unboxed Sports. See you next time.